Okay, next on the list is to enhance our search controller with filtering and ordering, and we'll stick with just the search items request, but we'll create an object to store these parameters in, otherwise it's going to get quite busy at the top of this file. So we'll go to Solution Explorer in the search service and we'll create a new folder and just call it request helpers. And inside here we'll create a new file that's going to be a class and we're going to call it search params. And inside this class we're just going to have properties that can be used as query string parameters. So we're going to have a string for the search term. We'll have an int for the page number. We'll have an int for the page size. And we'll actually give these some default values as well, because the first page is always going to be 1, and we'll add a default page size of 4 as well. But we'll allow them to overwrite this if they want. And then we'll have a string for the seller and a string for the winner, so that we can get the auctions they're either selling or the auctions that they have won, of course. And we'll have a string for the order by. And finally, we'll have a string for filter by. And we're not going to cover every possible ordering, filtering scenario here. We're just going to cover some basics so that we've got something to click on when it comes to the client user interface to demonstrate the functionality. You can go as far as you want with this, but I'm going to keep things relatively simple because remember, the goals of this course is microservices, not how to configure a search functionality so much. But we'll have something. So before we get to the pagination, we'll deal with the filtering. This needs to come at the end, the pagination stuff, so we find out what it is we're returning, and only then can we deal with what we're actually going to paginate. So let's remove the parameters we currently have, and we're going to replace this with an object. And we need to use an attribute here, because whilst our API controller attribute is excellent at binding strings into what we're using when it comes to the arguments here, when we supply these parameters via an object, we need to tell it where to look from, because by default, the API controller, if we pass this in as an object and we just say, let's say for instance, search params, and we call it search params, this won't work by default because it's going to look for this information because it's an object. It's going to look for this in the body of the request and not query string parameters. So we need to tell it where to look for this, and that's going to be from the query. And then we just need to update our parameters in here and say this is going to be search params.searchTerm. And same for this one, search params.searchTerm. And we'll have search params.pageNumber and search params.pageSize. And then above the query for the page number and page size, that's where we can add our other filters. And we'll specify that the query is equal to the search params.orderBy, and then we'll use a switch expression. And inside the curly brackets, we can define what we're going to switch on. So we're going to have a make, and this is ordering, so if they specify make, then it's going to be sorted by alphabetical in terms of the make. What we're doing right now actually with this particular query. And we can specify query.sort, and we'll say sort is x.ascending, and then we'll say x goes to x.make, and I can't use x twice there, I'm going to say a goes to a.make. And I've still got a complaint, and it's saying it cannot implicitly convert page search item to page search item. Okay, so we need to give it a second type parameter in our page search, and because we're using that ordering there, we need to specify item twice inside the type parameters for this one, and now the error has gone away. And we'll have a couple more, and the next one will be for new, which means auctions added most recently. So this is going to be descending rather than ascending. And we're going to do this by the created at date. And we'll also have a default parameter, which we specify with an underscore. And we'll say query.sort. And we'll say x goes to x.ascending. And we'll specify EA goes to a.auction end. And close this off with a semicolon. So this is going to be the default sorting, and effectively this is going to be auctions ending soonest. And because we've got sorting down here, we don't need this one up here anymore. So next we're going to deal with the filtering, and we're going to say query equals search params dot filter by, and again we'll use the switch expression. And we'll have finished auctions as one option, and we'll say query.match, and we'll say x goes to x.auction end, which is less than date time.utc now. And the next one is going to be ending soon, and we'll say query.match, and for this one we're just going to return auctions that are ending within 6 hours, for example. And we'll say x goes to x.auction end is less than date time .utc now. And we're going to add hours, and we'll say 6, just an arbitrary number, just as an example. And we'll say double ampersand, and x.auction end is greater than datetime.utc now, so we're only returning auctions that are still live and are close to being ended. And let's just move this down so that I don't hide stuff on the edge of the screen. And finally, for the default filtering option, we're just going to make sure that we only return live auctions. So this is going to be query.match, and we'll say the x.auction end is greater than datetime.utc now. And somehow I've got an extra thing there. Okay. And we'll close this off with a semicolon. So just a couple more filters to go. We'll check to see if we've got something in the seller and the winner properties. So we're going to have a couple of very similar queries here. And we'll say if string is not null or empty, so the exclamation mark, and we'll look for search params and seller. Then we're going to set the query, or say query.match, and x goes to x.seller is equal to search params dot seller. And I'm just going to be lazy and copy this line because we also need one for the winner, and change search params.seller to winner, and do the same here as well. So swap seller for winner and winner. Excellent. And this pretty much takes care of all of the functionality now that we need inside this controller. So as we come in, we first of all create the query, which is going to be a page search. We're going to check to see if we've got a search term, and if we do, we're going to match it. And then we're going to go through the rest of our queries. So even when they're searching, it's going to be ordered based on their selection, and it's going to be filtered based on their selection. And if we've got something in the seller, then of course that's going to just display the auctions that that user is selling, and same goes for the winner as well. And finally we page the results before returning them, along with the page count and the total count. So we should be able to go test this now. I'm just going to open up the terminal once again, and once again hot reloading has let me down, so I'm going to say yes to restart the app, and I'm going to head over to Postman, and we'll just test a few different queries. So we've just got one request here. We'll have to move around the different options we want to check. So for example, if I just want to check the auctions that Bob is the seller for, then I should be able to send this, and we get the results, and we can see that seller is Bob, Bob, and Bob, and there's 5 results over 2 pages, which means Bob is the seller for 5 auctions. If I change that to Tom, then obviously I should get the auctions that Tom is the seller for, which is just 1. I don't think we've got any auctions where there's actually a winner, but I'll just check and see if I did put Bob in as the winner for any of the auctions. I don't think I did. No, I didn't. So we don't have any auctions that have a winner, so we get 0 results, which is what we'd expect. But we do have an auction that is finished, so if I do type in filter by equals finished, then what we should get is a single auction back that has indeed finished, and it has an auction end date that is in the past, along with a status that is not live, in this case reserve not met. Okay, so please feel free to play around with these different filters, and they should all work as expected, but you might find it easier to wait until we get to the client app later, where we can just click on buttons to make sure that this is working as expected. But that's the coding part of creating our search service. But now we've got 2 different services, we're going to need to think about, if we were in real world and we were tasked with developing a search service for an existing application that has historically got, let's say, thousands of items inside, let's say, an auction service, we need to scratch our heads and think about how we're going to deal with that situation, because one of the challenges of microservices is data consistency. And before we implement the approach we're going to take, we're just going to have a quick talk about synchronous communication in microservices, and that's coming up next.